In order to know why Ecuador should stay in OPEC, the benefits of OPEC in general and what it provides for its member countries should be understood. OPEC's mission is to unify petroleum policies of its member countries and to stabilize oil markets in order to provide an efficient, economic, and regular supply of oil to its consumers. They want to be reliable and provide steady income to producers. They also want fair return on capital to investors. During the recession, when gas prices were high and our economy was declining, OPEC established a stable energy market. They prioritized sustainable development and the environment. OPEC adopted a comprehensive long-term strategy in 2005. After this, one country joined OPEC and Ecuador reactivated its membership.
Ecuador produces a small amount of oil and therefore relies on OPEC for support, access to information, and the ability to communicate ideas with other oil-producing nations. Ecuador produces about 504,000 barrels of crude oil a day. To give you a comparison, North Dakota averaged 821,000 barrels a day in June of this year. Standing alone, Ecuador doesn't have much influence among oil-producing countries, but as part of OPEC, Ecuador has a say in what happens to 75% of the world's crude oil reserves. By remaining a member of OPEC, Ecuador is able to keep control of its oil production while still coordinating with other countries to decide on oil production policies. OPEC also aims to stabilize the oil markets in order to provide a regular supply of oil to consumers and a steady income to producers. Without OPEC's support, Ecuador could potentially lose a large amount of revenue from oil production. Staying in OPEC creates a win-win-win situation for Ecuador.
Ecuador's economy relies heavily on oil production. Each year, Ecuador makes $23.9 billion on total petroleum exports, and $13.73 billion of their yearly export revenue comes from petroleum. Oil exports are responsible for 57% of the entire country's exports. OPEC is a worldwide IGO with a very large and influential voice and presence. Ecuador is a small country of 16 million, making it relatively hard to have their voice heard on important issues. Ecuador, for the past few years, has been lobbying to try and implement a 3.5% tax on every imported barrel that OPEC member countries produce. This tax will raise roughly $40 to $60 billion per year and go to the Green Climate Fund. This fund works toward curbing carbon emissions and to help make the environment more clean. Lastly, a portion of the $40 to $60 billion made by the potential tax, Ecuador wants to reimburse the Amazonian countries who don't use their oil reserves. This is because their oil is under the beautiful Yasuni National Park.
Keeping Ecuador in OPEC allows the country to have more information about the actions of other oil-producing nations. The President of Ecuador, Rafael Correa, said that returning to OPEC was an important step for the nation because it allows the nation, South America's fifth largest producer, to have better information on what other nations are doing. If Ecuador knew more about the actions of other oil-producing nations, they could emulate those actions and further increase the average amount of oil they produce. As of now, Ecuador produces 27,500 barrels of petroleum per day. So if they were to increase that amount of petroleum produced, OPEC's profits would be much higher. All of the countries in OPEC rely mostly on revenues from oil export. So if Ecuador increases the average amount of oil produced and exported by OPEC, the economies of those countries will benefit to a higher degree. Without Ecuador, the average amount of daily exports would decrease, and so would the income of the member countries.